London, 1868. The fog rolled thick along Whitechapel's narrow alleys, carrying with it more than just the stench of horse dung and coal smoke. It carried whispers. "There is a girl," they murmured in taverns and market stalls, "a girl who has not closed her eyes for sleep in more than a decade." Some laughed it off as a street tale, like Jack the Ripper's ghost stories. Others swore they'd seen her through the cracked shutters of her father's watchmaker shop, a pale figure sitting by lamplight, sewing through the night while the world lay in dreams. The legend spread like wildfire, and soon she was known simply as the girl who never slept. Her real name was Clara Whitfield, the only daughter of Mr. Thomas Whitfield, a humble watchmaker. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father's world revolved around Clara. By day, Clara stitched gowns for neighbors, tended to the shop, and read stories to street children who couldn't afford books. By night, she sat quietly by the fire, her eyes wide and shining, never drooping, never closing. She wasn't frail, nor was she lifeless. Her cheeks carried a faint blush of health. She could laugh, sing, and even run errands with energy. But she carried an aura, an unsettling one, because no matter the hour, her gaze was always awake. At first, neighbors pitied the Whitfields. When Clara was 6, her sleep vanished suddenly after a violent fever. Doctors predicted she wouldn't last the year. But she survived, awake. As years passed, pity turned to suspicion. Women whispered that she was cursed. Children mocked her as the ghost girl. Clergymen suggested her condition was punishment for unspoken sins. And yet, Clara longed for one thing above all, not wealth, not popularity, but the simple gift others took for granted, to close her eyes and dream. "Even nightmares," she once wrote in her journal, "would be a blessing, for even nightmares mean rest." Her story eventually reached the ears of Dr. Jonathan Harker, a young physician with more ambition than reputation. Fresh from medical school, eager to prove himself, he was hungry for a case that would set his name among London's greats. At first, he scoffed. A girl who never sleeps? Folklore. But curiosity gnawed at him until he found himself one evening at the Whitfield doorstep. Clara herself opened the door, her gaze steady, almost luminous in the lamplight. "Doctor," she said softly, as if she'd been expecting him. "You wish to see if the stories are true? Come in." Harker examined her carefully. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing calm, her pupils responsive. By every measure, she was a normal young woman, yet Clara confessed her secret torment. "I do not grow weary like others," she told him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "My body aches sometimes, like a violin string pulled too tight. But my mind is always awake. It has been 11 years, doctor." Her father leaned forward, desperation in his voice. "You must help her, sir. She is my only child. This cannot be natural." Harker hesitated, but he promised to try. To test her, Dr. Harker stayed overnight at the Whitfield home. Clara offered him tea, and they sat together in the small parlor as the clock ticked. Midnight passed. Clara embroidered a scarf. 2 o'clock. She read by candlelight. 4 o'clock. She began to hum softly, her eyes clear as ever. Harker's own head drooped until sleep claimed him in the chair. When he awoke, sunlight streamed through the curtains. Clara sat exactly as before, sewing with quiet patience. "You see, doctor," she said gently, "for me, night is the same as day. Always awake." Word of Harker's visit spread quickly. Within weeks, crowds gathered outside the Whitfield shop. Hawkers sold pamphlets with woodcut illustrations of the ever-wakeful girl. Some gawked as if she were a sideshow. Others demanded she prove herself by staying awake in their presence. Clara shrank from the window. "They do not see me as a person," she whispered to her father, "only as a curiosity, a machine that will not rest." Harker began to worry, not for her body, but for her spirit. Fame, he wrote in his notes, is more dangerous than any illness. While examining her chamber for clues, Harker found a small leather-bound journal under her pillow. Inside were Clara's secret thoughts. She wrote of her envy for children who spoke of their dreams, of her longing to escape a world where she was watched day and night. One line struck Harker most. "I do not fear death, only that I will live my entire life never knowing what it means to close my eyes and find peace." It was not science he saw in her writings. It was sorrow. Other physicians, eager for fame, rushed to the Whitfield home with their remedies. One suggested bleeding, another insisted electricity might shock her into slumber. A third offered opium. Clara refused most, but the sight of her father's worry broke her resolve. "Perhaps," she said hesitantly, "I should try, if only to give him hope." Harker disagreed, but he could not stop her. That night, Clara swallowed a spoonful of laudanum. For a moment, her eyelids fluttered heavy, her head nodded, but then her body convulsed violently, and she vomited the bitter tonic. She collapsed in tears. "Even when I want to sleep, my body denies me." As the months passed, Clara's health began to weaken, not from lack of sleep, but from loneliness. Her childhood friends avoided her. Suitors stopped calling. Mothers told their daughters not to linger near the cursed girl. One morning, Clara sat by the window staring at the dawn. She turned to her father and asked the question that broke his heart. "Papa, what man would want a wife who can never share a dream beside him?" Her father's eyes welled with tears, but he held her hands tightly. "The right man, my love, will see not your sleeplessness, but your soul." Clara smiled faintly, but her eyes, always awake, held the ache of one who wondered if such a man could exist. Dr. Jonathan Harker's medical reputation soared. Newspapers mentioned his name alongside the strange case of the sleepless girl, and colleagues invited him to lecture. But late at night, when the city quieted, guilt gnawed at him. Was he truly helping Clara, or was he exploiting her suffering for his own advancement? One evening, he confessed to Clara in her father's parlor, his voice heavy. "Miss Whitfield, I fear I am no better than the crowd outside your window. I wanted recognition. I made your life my stage." Clara, who sat stitching a small child's bonnet, lifted her eyes to him. Her voice was soft, yet steady. "Doctor, you have at least given me kindness. That is more than most. Do not burden yourself too deeply. My condition is not your fault." For the first time, Harker felt that perhaps Clara carried more wisdom than he, though she was only 17. In time, Clara's condition drew the notice of the church. Father Elwood, a stern clergyman with a booming voice, declared her either a miracle or an omen. "She must be tested before God," he thundered to a gathered crowd, "for no mortal child can endure without rest unless heaven or hell has marked her." The Whitfields resisted, but pressure mounted until Clara, weary of hiding, agreed. One cold Sunday, she stood before the congregation. Hundreds watched, waiting for her to confess to angelic visions or to witchcraft. Father Elwood's voice rang out, "Child, do you claim divinity? Do you claim a gift beyond mortal reach?" Clara's hands trembled, but her voice did not waver. "I claim only to be a girl who is very, very tired." The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. Some wept, others bowed their heads. Even Father Elwood faltered, for he saw not a miracle nor a monster, only a child burdened with sorrow. Winter pressed hard upon London, and Clara's strength waned. Her body, though astonishingly resilient, began to show cracks from years of strain. One night, as she helped her father polish a clock, her hands faltered. She swayed, then collapsed to the floor. Harker was summoned at once. He checked her pulse. It fluttered faintly. He examined her eyelids, but even in unconsciousness, they twitched, never fully shutting. It was as if her body refused rest, even in collapse. When Clara awoke, she clutched Harker's hand, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Even in the darkness, doctor, I could not sleep. I was awake inside it, Will I live all my days like this? Harker could not answer. His silence was answer enough. One evening, her father confessed something he had hidden for more than a decade. "When you were 6, Thomas Whitfield said, his voice trembling, "you burned with fever. The doctor told me you would die before dawn. I prayed. God forgive me. I prayed that he might spare your life, even if it meant you bore some burden instead." Clara stared at him, wide-eyed. "Papa, do you mean my sleeplessness is because of your prayer?" Thomas buried his face in his hands. "I have lived with the fear that I bartered away your rest to keep you alive. If so, the fault is mine, not yours." Clara laid a hand on his shoulder. "Then I am grateful, Papa. For though I am weary, I am alive. And I would rather live without sleep than never have lived at all." Her words soothed him, though the weight of guilt never fully left. Dr. Harker began to suspect Clara's mystery was neither wholly medical nor wholly spiritual. He noticed that while her body never slumbered, her spirit seemed to quiet in certain moments. When she listened to a violinist play in the marketplace, when she sat with children and told them stories, when she prayed softly by candlelight. "Perhaps," he told her one evening, "sleep for you is not the closing of the eyes, but the finding of peace. Perhaps your rest must be sought not in slumber, but in life itself." Clara listened, tears glistening. "Then I must learn to live as others dream." Taking his advice to heart, Clara began seeking moments of serenity. She visited Kew Gardens to see the orchids bloom, watched the sun paint the Thames in shades of gold, and let herself laugh with children in the street. Though she never slept, she seemed lighter, as if each small joy gave her a kind of waking dream. "I may never dream in my bed," she told Harker with a small smile, "but perhaps I can weave a dream in my days. Perhaps that is enough." And for the first time, hope replaced despair in her eyes. One afternoon, a young bookseller named Edmund Hale arrived at the Whitfield shop to deliver a volume Clara had ordered. He was tall, soft-spoken, with ink-stained fingers from handling texts. Instead of staring at her unblinking eyes, he asked, "What stories do you favor, Miss Whitfield?" Surprised, Clara named Dickens and Shelley. They fell into conversation, forgetting the time. Edmund returned days later with another book, and again they talked for hours. He treated her not as a curiosity, but as a friend. Soon, Clara's cheeks carried a warmth not seen in years. She began to wonder if her father's words, that the right man would see her soul, not her sleeplessness, might be true. By spring of 1870, Clara and Edmund wed in a modest ceremony attended by friends, neighbors, and Dr. Harker himself. Clara, radiant in white lace, confessed her deepest fear to Edmund before the vows. "One day," she whispered, "I may collapse and never rise again. Will you still want a wife who can never dream by your side?" Edmund took her hands firmly. "Then every waking moment we share will be our heaven. We will not waste a single one." They kissed, and the congregation wept, not from sorrow, but from joy. Clara had found something greater than sleep. She had found love. Years passed. Clara bore a child, a little girl with her father's dark eyes. To everyone's astonishment, the child slept peacefully, like any other. Clara often sat by the crib, watching her daughter's serene face, marveling at the mystery of it all. Doctors remained baffled. Some even declared Clara's story exaggerated, claiming no one could live so long without sleep. But those who knew her, the neighbors who had seen her at her sewing table at all hours, the doctor who had watched her through endless nights, knew the truth. Clara was not defined by her sleeplessness. She was defined by her strength, her kindness, and her refusal to let her burden steal her joy. On a quiet autumn evening, decades after her sleepless childhood began, Edmund found Clara sitting in her favorite chair by the fire. For the first time in 50 years, her eyes were closed, not half shut in exhaustion, but truly closed. Her head rested gently against the cushion, a faint smile gracing her lips. She had fallen asleep. When Edmund touched her hand, it was cool. Clara had passed away, but not in suffering. At last, she had entered the rest she had sought all her life. News spread, and some called it tragic. But those who loved her saw it differently. After a lifetime of wakefulness, she had finally been granted the sweetest dream. Her legacy was not of sorrow, but of courage, a reminder that burdens need not define us, and that even without rest, a soul can live fully awake.